Hello, and welcome to Education in Focus, where today we will be considering behaviour management within schools. Education in Focus is a podcast brought to you by Adoption Focus, and it's a space to delve into all things school and education related. My name is Leigh, and I'm the training manager at Adoption Focus. The education of our children is a real passion of mine, so it's a privilege for me to be joined by two of our education experts here at Adoption Focus, Jason Gilman Hughes and Lisa Biggs. Jason is our wonderful education advisor, and your background is primary education, isn't it, Jason?
It is, yes. I spent a lot of years, over 20, 25, I think now, in primary schools at various different roles. So, class teacher, clearly, Senko, deputy head teacher, and learned a lot over those years and never stopped learning. I don't you ever feel like you quite get there. There's always something new to challenge you in schools, but it's a great experience. And then last 5 years or so, I've been a foster parent as well. So it's interesting to see how things are from that point of view, looking after children and seeing what the experiences are for them at home and how schools can be seen from a parent's point of view. So it's very interesting.
That's great. Thank you, Jason. And our second expert is Lisa. Lisa is part of the training team at Adoption Focus, supporting our adopters to navigate their adoption journey. Your experience is as a secondary school teacher, isn't it, Lisa?
It is, yep. So for my sins, I was a secondary school maths teacher for 13 years. And like Jason, held a variety of positions within a school. So I have experience of just being a standard class teacher, form tutor, but also as head of department and on the senior leadership team in one instance. So a breadth of knowledge across various things in schools. But I do find that since becoming an adoptive parent in 2019, my understanding and how I would be as a teacher has changed and evolved.
Thanks, Lisa. So, just for you listeners, within Education in Focus, we will explore a range of topics and we would really welcome your suggestions, questions, and contributions. So, please feel free to drop us an email at education@adoption-focus.org.uk. Some topics we explore will be specific to the needs of our children, whilst others will be more generic. We will never profess to be the experts on every school and every child, but we'll endeavour to offer different perspectives and give you the tools to support your child's education. So, today we are exploring behaviour management within schools. And I think before we even really get into it, Lisa and Jason, it's really important for us to emphasise that this will be for every adoptive family a personal issue based on lots of different factors, such as the individual needs of our children, their background, what school they're at, and the family dynamics at home.
Completely. Yeah, it's such a huge area,
It
but
is.
an important area. And it's one thing that will be quite often an area that presents challenges at home and in school. So we've got to talk about it, I think, but we also need to remember that we can't possibly be experts. There are people who are experts in behaviour and who know a lot more than we do. But nevertheless, the stuff I can say, hopefully that might have a useful perspective, give a bit of food for thought. And if there are any nuggets of advice that either of us can offer, then great.
I agree wholeheartedly. But how behaviour is thought about and how it's planned for varies widely from school to school. And it also depends upon the individual expertise and experience and level of understanding of the teachers within the school. You may find that you naturally click with, or your child naturally connects with some teachers more than others, and therefore you may go through a few years where the behavior or how it's managed, there isn't really a problem and there's nothing to really think about. And then one year might be more difficult just because different people are involved. So yeah, nothing that we can say today will be universal, but as Jason said, if there's any nuggets in there that we think will be useful, we will pass them on.
That's great. Thank you both. So, when we think about behaviour management in schools, what do we mean when we say behaviour, when we say management? What are we talking about?
Well, I think the first thing that popped into my head when I thought about it was essentially it's about promoting behaviour for learning. That school is somewhere where children go to learn, or a secondary school. We see learning as kind of the reason for being there, and so it's about promoting behaviours that will enable that to happen. Um, that can look very different in different areas of a school or different areas of a secondary school. So, how you might imagine a maths classroom to look would probably be different to how you would imagine a drama class to look or an art class. Um, Within a science lab, there's obviously health and safety considerations that need to be taken into account with the equipment and Bunsen burners and all of that. So, what it looks like can be different, but the underlying element is really promoting that behaviour for learning and making sure that people are safe and able to do what they need to do.
Yeah, so I agree with that, Lisa. I think we made a really good point. And what came to my mind when we talked about behaviour or think about behaviour was how it's communication. And that's something that is something that's part of training prior to being a foster parent, sure, and I'm sure it's part of the adoptive process too. And we know that probably, but I'm not sure schools always remember that, or maybe don't. It's not always on the forefront of their minds. I think we've got to keep that in mind when things are difficult. The child is communicating something to us, probably, and the question is, what is it they're trying to say? I suppose that's where I always try and get the starting point. Just like we said, schools need to be nurturing, and from a primary point of view, that's really important. The nurture and the safety is number one. But even within that, there still needs to be firm boundaries, and there still needs to be consistency, because children who are vulnerable, have been through a lot, will need that knowledge that the adults around them are predictable and reliable, and that they're going to mean what they say. And that's also when they're promising to do something nice, mean it. But also when they're saying, no, that's not acceptable, we're not going to do that, and to follow it through, because that's how they feel safe too, isn't it? So there's a point at which being firm and consistent is important and does help them feel safe. Some people, that's not to say that you're being harsh or punitive, but it's also a part of the strategy that really supports children, because it's when things are not followed through, adults don't appear to be as reliable, that children begin to feel wobbly and stressed, and then start pushing the boundaries because they want to know where the boundaries lie, so they know where, am I going to be safe? Well, is this person actually going to do what they say? Because quite often in their lives that may not have happened.
I find it so interesting listening to that, Jason, like thinking about it from a secondary perspective and a primary perspective, because almost yearly throughout my career, we would have, teacher training on behaviour management. And I'm trying really hard to remember whether I was ever told in my capacity as a teacher that behaviour is a communication, is a form of communication. And I really don't think that I was. It's only through becoming an adoptive
No.
parent and thinking about it from that point of view that I kind of changed my view of the importance of child behaviour, and also I think in secondary, there isn't so much emphasis on nurture. There isn't so much emphasis on being consistent and available and supportive and ensuring a child feels safe. And I'm not speaking for all secondary schools. There will be some fantastic secondary schools out there that do have that at the forefront of their behaviour management policy, but unfortunately none of the schools that I worked in did. And actually our view and the training that we received were very much from, this is the behaviour that you want to have, and if you are not getting it, these are the things that you can do. But they were not coming from a place of being empathic or accepting and really trying to understand what the child was telling you through their behaviours. It just was absent from my training for the vast majority of my career.
Yeah, I can echo that. I'm trying to think if the training we had really talked about that, except when we did some work on attachment and things like that, then it became much more of a feature. But no sort of standard CPD on behaviour. I'm not sure how much of it contains that now.
Well, again, I find it interesting that you had training on attachment, because again, I managed 13 years of teaching without having any training on attachment at all. And, I did generally build good relationships with students, and I did generally, have safe classrooms where they were happy to be. It wasn't something that I struggled with, but I think that probably came more from me than the training that I received. And I think it's really useful to kind of just be aware when we do communicate with teachers and when we do talk to our schools, we bring, as adoptive parents, as your experience in foster care, we bring knowledge that perhaps they don't have. And one would hope they would be receptive to that. But it might be worth just understanding that they might have very limited experience of thinking about the reasons behind a child's behaviour.
Yeah, I really hope, and I'm actually thinking about even in my role as education advisor for adoption focus referrals that have come to me where there have been where behaviour's possibly been an element of that. Actually, nearly almost in every case, the school wants to do something, wants to make a change because the issues may have arisen because it's a new challenge to them, and the situation is unique, it's different, but they're not closed to it. They're not blaming the child or blaming the family. They're just saying, we're not quite sure, we'd like some help. And sometimes they find it difficult to get the help they need. Services are very stretched, and they're struggling sometimes, with these things. So I would say, generally speaking, schools want to do the right thing. That's what they're there for. So if things aren't going right, it's not always for a want of trying. And I'm sure there are cases people might be able, maybe people sitting this screaming, going, "No, that's not the case." Because there may be cases where they don't feel that's the case in their school. I don't know, but certainly that often is, and I hope where that is the case, I hope it is true, because that's where you can work together as a family with the school and try and navigate a way through some of the challenges that you're going to come across.
I was just thinking back to your question, Lee, about what do we mean by behaviour, and what does it look like, and I think just like
Yeah.
from my experience, what I wanted my classroom to look like, the behaviours that I wanted from the children, are actually probably things that many do find quite difficult. I was a maths teacher, so I wanted them sat down in the right place. I wanted them quiet. I wanted them listening. I wanted them to follow the instructions. I wanted them to do as they were told. I wanted them to ask questions by putting their hand up. It was very structured, very yeah, just very structured and quite rigid. I also taught in one school. It was an old school, that the as in the buildings were very old, which meant the classrooms were very tiny because they were built for smaller classes. So when we then tried to put um 30, 15-year-olds in there, we were bursting at the seams. So actually, not only did I want my classroom to look quiet and orderly, it was a necessity in some cases because I didn't have any room. Like, I could barely walk down the aisles to go and see students. And so I'm guessing that probably looks different in a secondary school, Jason. I'm guessing the expectation of what that classroom will look like might be different with the younger children.
It's a bit like you said earlier about depending on the subject they're doing, because in some lessons you need them up and about because they're active. It's in drama and PE, of course. But in other situations, you do need them. It does need to be calm and quiet, and a lot of children prefer that. If they find if being at school is something that brings anxiety in them, then they actually like when it's calm and quiet and predictable and fairly routine. So I think they need a mixture. So they need to be able to let off steam and express themselves in some ways, but calm and quiet is actually good. I'm not saying through fear, for an iron rod, you're not getting
Yeah.
silenced by marching them down, but you can easily achieve a calm, quiet environment through the atmosphere that you create and get the children to understand that's what we need, just a little bit quiet. We're going to have a few minutes now where we're going to stop thinking, a bit of thinking time, and that's perfectly fine. And if you walk in most primary schools, I guess if you walk in classrooms, they're generally going to be quite calm. Might be a quite gentle hum and buzz if there's conversations happening at tables, but it's not going to be noisy or chaotic, because that's not safe anyway. Children don't feel safe if the environment is like that. So I go to what I said before about adults. They need to know that the adults are reliable and keep things
Yeah.
keep things calm for them.
So taking, what you've both said, and the excellent point that we know, and hopefully those of you listening know, that the behaviour of our adopted children is a communication tool. It's their way of showing and expressing how they're feeling. How have we seen schools manage that really well? And then maybe how have we seen them manage it not so well? And that's not to be, detrimental towards any school, but just maybe some things for us to bear in mind as parents.
It's quite a hard question, or two questions to kind of get to grips with. I think because the behaviours that children exhibit in school can be varied, or problematic behaviours can be very, very varied. So you might have at one end of the spectrum, children being quite
Yeah.
disruptive, and and deliberately trying to set the class off the rails, as it were, or it might be a refusal, a very quiet refusal to do any work or to engage with the work that might be causing the problem. It might be the need to move around a lot, which we know that many of our children have sensory processing issues. They actually do need to move in order to be able to concentrate and to feel where they are in space and kind of access the lesson that way. But all of these little things are different ways that perhaps, or different things that teachers might find difficult to manage, behaviours that teachers might find difficult to manage. And how they choose to do that would probably vary instance to instance.
Yeah.
The things I've generally seen, unfortunately, have been quite shame inducing. So I have worked with many teachers who like to write names on the board, and there'll be a good list and there'll be a bad list. And you want
Right.
to, I know, and you want to, the expectation is that the children want to be on the good list. So therefore they will behave to do that. Um, which we know isn't always the case, is it really? And having your name on the naughty list for the whole class to see can make a child feel a lot of shame, and shame in itself can then bring out some very, very difficult and challenging behaviours. Um, I've unfortunately seen quite a lot of the idea of 3 strikes and you're out. So again, it's kind of writing a name on the board, and when you have 3 tallies next to it, then that's when you leave the classroom. Isolation rooms are quite common in secondary schools. So if a child is not doing as the teacher expects of them, then they can be removed from the classroom to go and spend the rest of the lesson in isolation. And yeah, unfortunately, my general experience has been those kinds of strategies.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that they ever really fix a problem or kind of help
No.
a child to develop the behavior that perhaps the teacher's expecting to see. It actually tends to create a little bit of like an impasse, really. And there's no communication there with the child. The things that I've seen that have been much more useful, much more helpful, have generally been when a teacher does understand that behaviour is communication, and therefore opens a channel of communication with the child to find out what's underlying it and to find out what they can do to help. But that has never been written into the behaviour management policies of the schools that I've worked in. So it's something that teachers do or can do and does work, but it's not often what's written down in black and white.
That's a good point. I was just thinking, yeah, it's a really good point, because I had sort of cringed like when you talked about the names on the board, because I've done that myself as a teacher.
I did
Before
when
I
I
knew
first
before I knew
started.
better, and I think,
Yeah.
oh, what that was what was expected, what we all did, thought it was the right thing, but now in reflection, I think for some children that really isn't helpful. But go back to what you said about policies. Yes, policies in black and white are important, and they help everyone in the school to adopt a consistent approach. But for our children, it might not be appropriate to we might need something that's a little bit different, slightly out of bounds, but somehow is still not doesn't like let's say give permission in inverted commas to do what you like or behave inappropriately. That's a difficult one, but I think that's where schools probably do have more success. You can have a lot more success if you can come up with something that's more bespoke to some children who, you can try all you like to enforce rules through a punitive sort of punishment strategy. It's just not going to change ultimately in the long term. It could actually do more harm. So yeah, you won't find those things written down, because for individual children, you have to come up with some arrangement that you think is going to work for them and everybody. And that's where schools can do really well. I think for primaries, again, it's just sometimes it's inherently a bit easier because it's the one class teacher, and there's often maybe an adult support member of staff that's available that can help. It sometimes just there's a bit more opportunity to be more flexible. And of course, you get to know the relationships are going to be strong because they get to know the child all throughout the day. And so the relationships are at the heart of it, really, and that's where you can often find things improve as trust develops and understanding of what makes someone tick, and looking out for signs before things go wrong. You think, oh, I think you're being. I can see you finding this a little bit tricky, aren't you? Let's do this, and there's a chance for them to maybe move to a different area, go to a safe space or whatever. But having something that's bespoke is often helpful, I think. I did go on some training some time ago, and I remember this. Somebody said what's like basically an oxymoron. It's basically they said you might need flexible consistency, which of course, which doesn't make sense in a sense, but it does in terms of our children. I think. In other words, you're still operating to the core values of the school and what's important. So if the school's all about kindness and respect, etc., you can still do that. And you can still get good behaviour, but it may not be always through the same mechanisms as others. And that's where you might have much more success. That's where the communication between the home and school is going to be essential, and understanding what helps, what triggers your child. So if you're raising your voice, using particular forms of words might be the last thing that child needs. They may have had an early childhood experience where that's what people did all the time, so it has no impact. It doesn't. They don't suddenly conform. So you need to come up with sometimes things that will just help them, little things, little strategies that support them, and it might be individual reward systems. Understanding small steps are really important. They might need lots of acknowledgement that little things they've done are really good and valued and successful. No good waiting at the end of a lesson to say well done. They might need well done for getting a pencil out, well done for sitting down here, well done for doing this, and just recognise those little steps.
Yeah, it's about noticing the good, isn't it? And offering
Always.
praise, because we know that children will behave better. They'll feel happier. They'll be communicating less negativity if they're feeling good. So teachers ensuring that they offer praise for the things that are praiseworthy is really, really important. It can help build those relationships.
I think then, sorry,
sorry.
Leigh, so if I can just then play devil's advocate, sometimes come in and stir it up a little bit. Praise is, for some of our children, works incredibly well, doesn't it? But then we know also for some of our children, praise can also really feel quite overwhelming. And as much as we want to lavish it on them and build their self-esteem and their self-worth, it might be about having a conversation with school that they find it really hard to tolerate shame, and so you're going to have to do it indirectly or subtly, or just give it them every now and again. That works great, rather than you've done brilliant on that, taking away that directness. So again, I think, like both of you've been saying, it's that individual child, isn't it, and talking about them as an individual.
Yeah,
it is. And again, something that just came up from that you were saying is we might, as adopters and our experience in this area, we might have an awareness of the difference between you're fantastic, well done, and that piece of work is brilliant, that piece of work is fantastic. We can understand that the language there is very, very different, but I don't think that we can have the expectation that all teachers in all classrooms will know the difference between those two sentences.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And something about that communication with school is, it's okay to bring that up and just say, she doesn't respond very well if you put it all on her. Have you tried perhaps, depersonalizing some of those comments and not putting, because again, all children are different, and we do work with children who find that pressure and that expectation to be perfect and to live up to very, very difficult. So actually putting it off them is useful.
I think you're right. Just maybe think a bit more about this communication issue, which is the thing that is at the heart of all of this, isn't it? I think if you anticipate there might be some issues, you need to establish a form of communication with the school. So what is it you're going to do? So rather than being the person that feels like they're being a pest and ringing up, or the school equally doesn't want to be the one ringing up if there's things are going wrong, you might want something like some schools run a chat book. This is again primary school I'm talking about here, or they might have a messaging service that they use online. You can have brief chats after school, but that is difficult if the child's there on the playground. They don't want you, against shaming, sometimes have a conversation about them in front of them. That's really not a good idea, unless it's something, again, if they can cope with it, if it's something nice, or they want to tell you something, that's fine, but maybe best to avoid that. I have to say, one thing that we discovered at school, from a school point of view, is that sometimes a child would come home and say they'd had the most awful day ever. It's been terrible, really awful, and the parents been really upset, thinking, oh, what sort of day they had. It's been never known. I had no one to play with. I had a big fallout with so and so, and this was a word. As far as the parents concerned, that's a really horrible picture. And think, what am I doing sending my child to school? It's really not working for them, and worry. And then he goes to school. The school says, no, they had really quiet. No, they had a little fallout here, but the rest of the day did this, did that. She engaged in that activity. She was playing with so and so at playtime. Oh, okay. So you get a kind of slightly confused picture, and that's not saying anyone's particularly wrong, because for our children, that one event might be the thing that just overshadowed everything, and they remember the feeling. They take that feeling home with them, and that's the thing they're saying. That's why they're saying they had the worst day ever. But a way to avoid that sometimes is to again come with the group where you might have a very simple picture in a chat book or some other form where you give an overview of some of the highlights of the day for that child's, like 3 of the things that went well. So it gives them something to talk about, and if there's something that went wrong, they can acknowledge that as well. And the parent, as a parent, can look at that at home and say, "Oh, you did." So even if you don't have to say anything about it, you just be aware that over the course of the day, it was not a wholly unpleasant, negative experience. There were some things that went well for them, but some children don't necessarily remember that or bring that home with them when they talk about it.
I've just been thinking there about this idea of communication with a secondary school, because there will be so many teachers involved in your child's education, and each of those teachers will have, possibly different expectations, different ways of managing behaviour. They might apply behaviour policies slightly differently, and how do you get that message out there to the people that need to hear it? And I would suggest that if your child or your children are having issues in a particular lesson, then you would talk to the class teacher about it in the first instance. If it's across the board or across several lessons, then you might want to go to a form tutor or a head of year. But I would suggest that, if it's got to the point where you feel that there is a problem, there are continually challenging behaviours, be that refusal or be it more disruptive or anything, that you kind of, if possible, do that chat in person and dedicate some time to it. So it's not a 5-minute conversation at the end of the school day. It's actually like a meeting, a booked in meeting. So don't try and squeeze it into parents' evening appointments. Actually, because what you want is to have dedicated time where you can explain the triggers that your child may be experiencing. You can find out how their behavior is being managed in the course of a school day. You can then communicate in what ways that works for your child and in what ways it doesn't work for your child. But also, really importantly, is that you leave that meeting with kind of clear ideas about what you want the school to try, and actions, as it were, for future. So can we try this for the next fortnight and see if it has a better impact? See if they are making it through the school day with less disturbances, and then also organise a time for a follow-up meeting to see whether this has had any impact or not. I think it's such a nuanced area, and it's such an area where the children are individual and unique, that it's very difficult to have a blanket policy. And so if we do need to talk to schools about it, we need to do it with appropriate time. Even simple things like, have you tried forgetting any secondary behaviors? So for example, you've asked them to sit down and they have, but then they've shoved their pen off the table because they're cross. Well, the pen is a secondary behaviour. They've done what you wanted them to do, so praise them for it and move on. That might just be a little thing that has a real impact upon how this teacher and this child are communicating.
So, Jason, I don't know if you can help with this question at all, but I've heard quite a lot about sometimes our adopted children might mask or be masking in school. And I wondered if you could talk us through a little bit about that and how that plays into behaviour and behaviour management in schools.
Well, that's a really good question. I think it's a big issue for a lot of our children. For them, they're masking, essentially, they're just looking on the surface as if they're fine, that they're listening, they're engaging, they're doing as they're told, they're being very compliant. It's all very lovely. And so at the end of the day, the teacher could quite easily be led to believe that the child is fine, absolutely happy, no problems whatsoever. Don't know really what this fuss is all about. This is absolutely great. This child is coping really well. And reality is that they're just keeping a lid on, and underneath it's absolutely bubbling away, and it's about quite to burst. And often It does burst when they get home. It explodes like the pop bottle, that's been shaken. And that can all come spilling out, and it can have horrendous time at home. You can have all kinds of battles, and then it goes on all the way to bedtime and stuff. And as a parent, that can be really difficult to try and explain to the school this is what's happening. Now, it's not to blame the school, but it's just to help them understand that when they're saying, "Oh no, she's absolutely lovely," or "He's absolutely fantastic," no problem at all. Not it's helping to understand that it may not be actually what's happening. It can be very difficult, that one, because it just doesn't look. It looks, to all intents and purposes, like a child who isn't. He was absolutely fine and doesn't come from a background of trauma, for example. So it's something that has to be chipped away at, I think, and hope, and trying to get to school to look for signs. And maybe you'd have to say, "Well, I know when she's doing it because this happens," and they put the head down, or the little finger twitches, or the leg shakes up and down, and that's because it's a sort of a leakage of stress. Um, or do they always stand at the back of the line? Or there's little signs they might show that they're actually feeling very anxious and looking for reassurance all the time. So I think, yeah, it's something to bring up, and say to the school, just have you considered it might be this. This is what they sometimes did. Perhaps they did it when they first came to live with you. It might be something you've seen yourself, and know how it can sort of show itself.
That's it. 'Cause if we can kind of educate the school on signs that our child or our children might be masking, then there are things that they can, like, put in place for them. So, it might be that they have an adult that they've connected with in the school, might not be a class teacher, but it might be a member of the Senko, or a dinner lady, or librarian, or something. There might be a quieter room they can go to in the school, so actually they can get breaks in the day, because or it might be that they need their breaks later in the week, because actually, as children get more tired, it is harder for them to keep that mask up. It is harder for them to kind of keep a lid on it all. And so if we can kind of get the schools to recognize some of those signs, some of those things that might give you cause for concern, then they might be able to factor in breaks for your child, just to help them kind of, decompress a little bit, and then make it back to a later lesson with a little bit more left in the tank.
Yeah, it's a good plan. And sometimes it might be important for the adults to say for the child. I know that sometimes you find whatever it might be a bit tricky, lunchtime, or coming out of lunchtime, or whatever situation. Insert thing here. I know you sometimes find this a bit tricky, makes you have some wobbly feelings inside, but we understand and we're here to help you. And they might still be going, "No, no, fine," and they might still be trying to mask and smile it through. But even so, just saying it to them helps them to see that even if they would never actually admit it or say it. But I think sometimes inside that helps them to understand that you are connecting with them and helping them.
We've also, I have experience of children having exit passes as well, so that when they can kind of feel that it's all getting a bit too much, if they feel that they're not able to cope very well, then they can have an exit pass, which just allows them to leave the classroom. And it's not, I mean, I'm talking older children now, in secondary school, and it's not that it's not to be used willy nilly for a half-hour tour of the school, but for that kind of like 5-10 minutes, just to kind of go out, get a little bit of downtime before coming back in. And we've spoken before on previous podcasts about the use of, giving a child a job. So if a teacher can recognise they're finding it all a bit much, perhaps they can send them on an errand, just to drop something off to a teacher the other side of the school. It gives them a bit of movement, gives them a bit of time on their own. Then they can come back and be able to kind of get back in with the routine. So yeah, if you
Mm.
can educate the school on the signs, and let them know that your child is wearing a mask a lot of the time, then there are things they can do to factor in some breaks.
Yeah, in primary schools, it's quite normal, I would say, for them to have a little area set up where a child might need to go, feel a little safe corner, a safe area where they can just sort of move themselves away to if they need to.
But it's all about educating our children as well, isn't it? Because some children are very good, and they can recognise when they're starting to
Mm.
fizz. They can recognise that something's about to happen. Whereas, for other children, it takes a lot longer for them to understand that, and to feel it coming, and to know that they're perhaps about to blow.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, helping your child to understand or to recognize their own symptoms again over time might help as well. They'll recognize when they're starting to feel a bit fizzy, and what they can do.
I think, Jason, you mentioned when we were talking about masking that, sometimes our children mask all day and they come home and they're a pop bottle that is ready to burst. And I think as adoptive parents, we know that we have to deal with the emotional backlash of masking and containing all day, and that can be really difficult. But for both of you, really, where would you say, or would you say there is a divide between school and home in terms of behaviour management? So, say that our child has perhaps displayed some really challenging behaviour at school that day, school have made you aware. Do you have conversations about it at home? Do you then put in consequences too? Or do you just leave that as that was at school, this is home?
That's a good one, isn't it? I probably would have thought differently maybe some years ago, but I'd say at the moment, leave it. If it's been dealt with and it's been acknowledged, it's done. It's finished. There's nothing you can do about it. It can't affect it. You weren't there. If the child wants to talk about it, that's fine. Let them bring it up. But I think you could acknowledge it by saying, "I see you've had a very difficult day." Say, "Never mind. Right, well, that's finished now. School's done. Don't think about it. It's a brand new day, fresh start tomorrow. All the rest of it, and leave it. Really, I'd say, because there's nothing to be gained. I suppose, unless they say the child particularly wants to talk about it. That's up to them. But most of the time, they won't want to. They'll rather not. But not saying you're ignoring it, because you're still saying, "I know it was tricky today." That's often a good word using it. Things were difficult, weren't they? Rather than sort of saying anything that's blame laden, and leave it.
It's interesting what you were saying about your views have probably changed, because I think certainly earlier on in my career, I would be wanting parents to support perhaps some of the decisions that I'd made, or some of the consequences that I put in place.
Mm,
And I wasn't a parent myself then, so I was coming at it without really any experience of what it was like to live with a child. Um, and I think now, having a little bit more experience, a little bit more understanding, and being a parent, I think it is important that a line is drawn between
mm,
school and home. I don't think there's anything to be gained by by raking it over, by trying to make up, if in inverted commas, for things that happened earlier in the day. Again, like you say, if a child wants to talk about it, I'll talk about it. But as a parent, I'll be coming at it in a very pacey way.
mm,
I'll be accepting, I'll be curious, I'll be empathic, I'll be wanting to support them, but I'm not going to be wanting them to atone for anything, and I'm
yeah,
not going to be wanting to punish them for anything, because actually I don't believe that that's the right thing to be done, full stop.
yeah,
The one thing I would say, though, whilst I am clear in my mind that there is a divide between school and home, I do think that it's key that the school and the home do try and work together. So if I was having frustrations with the school, perhaps I don't think they're handling things particularly well, perhaps I want to take it further. That doesn't mean I'm going to be communicating that to my little one. I'm going to be acknowledging that they've had a difficult time, acknowledging that it was a bit tricky, acknowledging that, that perhaps not everyone handled things particularly well, but I'm not going to be there saying, "Oh gosh, yes, Mr. Terence was absolutely awful. I can't believe he did that. That was totally unacceptable," or anything along that, because it's actually not helping them go back in the next day.
no,
Um, so I'll be trying to yeah, talk to them about how they're feeling, whilst being broadly positive about the school, and how we can make things better for them in the classroom.
yeah. There's a
What would you
massive.
do? Sorry, Jason.
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking. Well, because Lisa said something really important about that. About the sort of leaving stuff at home, and I was thinking there's a big world of difference really between being supportive of the school and then letting things that are school related stay with the school. Because it's not saying, by saying, okay, that's done and dusted, acknowledging it and moving on, that's not saying you don't support the school, you're not supportive or involved. Um, it's not saying, it's just a way of dealing with the situation in a measured way, I'd say.
And Lisa, you just mentioned, if you weren't happy with the way that, say, school had managed your child's behaviour, that you wouldn't be saying that to your child, which I think is great advice. What would you do though if you weren't happy with how they'd handled it? If either of you really, how would you? What would you do?
Well, I think I mentioned before, that idea of like actually having a proper meeting, proper set aside time where you can kind of convey more understanding to the teacher about your child, the signs they might be showing, things that work, things that don't work. And that's really good. And if that has been unsuccessful, perhaps if it hasn't seen a turnaround, I think there are like two routes that you could think about following. So in a secondary school, it might be, as I said, like with a certain teacher. If you feel that the teacher has not followed up on your recommendations or is perhaps still employing methods that are quite shame inducing, that are not helpful, you don't feel that's progressed, then it'd be worth speaking to someone a little bit higher up in the school, perhaps going to a pastoral head, um, and just kind of having the same conversation but at a higher level to hopefully then see those things translate into school. However, if you feel that perhaps the school itself is at fault, perhaps you might feel that they don't have a knowledge and understanding of what it's like working with children who've experienced trauma. Perhaps within the school there isn't that expertise to think about seeing behaviour as communication, then I'd probably think about coming back to your adoption agency and talking to them and talking to a support worker, because there are things that we could do. We could have those conversations with a school on your behalf. They might be more receptive to it when it comes from a professional rather than from a parent. Or it might be in the case of, we might be able to do some work with the school. We might be able to talk to them about attachment. We might be able to talk to them about the effects of early life trauma on the brain. We might be able to talk through some strategies that we do with the talk about with adoptive parents, and we might be able to help educate them and improve their behaviour policy. So I think it's probably going to be one of those two routes. If you think it's just with a certain person in the school, escalate it up the ladder a little bit. But actually, if you think the school need more information, then probably come to a professional, that use your adoption agency, and they can do some of their work on your behalf. What would you think, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely agree. That's really, really sound advice. I wouldn't disagree at all. I think going back to the issue about it's difficult when you're feeling emotional about a situation. If you feel the school's not done something very well and it's caused problems, and you just feel upset on behalf of your child, I mean, it's all right. But sitting here saying to people, try not to be emotional with the school, try not to get angry, because it's all very well. In reality, it's not easy. But if you are if you react in anger or start slagging the school off at home or in the car on the way home or whatever, and saying, "Ah, I can't believe they did that again. They're rubbish over there. They haven't got a clue what they're doing." Your child's going to pick all that up, and it's going to say, I'm not in the right place. I'm not in a good school here. It's not very good." And it's just going to perpetuate the whole issue. It's going to undermine everything. Even if you believe all that, even if you believe that yourself, it's just about saying, "Oh dear, you've had a difficult day. Bite your lip, swear, whatever you need to do in a different place, and have that conversation with the school. Like say, sit down and arrange a meeting." And I think that's where having someone who can support you maybe is a really good idea, because um, they can take some of the emotion out of it as well for you, because that's where it's hard. You want to express what's wrong and try and get a solution. And when you're still feeling upset and angry, then it can be difficult to know where to begin and try and, because you want to boil it down to some clear action points, don't you, to move things forward.
And also, as a post-adoption support worker, it's okay for parents to vent at me. They can tell me the unvarnished truth of how they feel about the school and not pass it on to the child. And also, we know that if we go into a school with all guns blazing and really berating them, we're probably not going to move in the direction that we want. We're not building relationships with them that are going to help our child or our children.
No.
So come and vent at me or your post-adoption support worker, get it all out, that anger and frustration out, and then we can think of like an action plan of how we can approach it in a more helpful way.
Yeah, definitely. Watch out, loads of phone calls now, Lisa. You're going to get.
Yeah, I've put myself out there, haven't I?
One thing I was going to suggest as well is, if your child is, this is a completely separate thought, but it kind of moves on from what we said about your child having additional needs. Quite a lot of our children will probably be be recognised as having some kind of special educational need and involved with the Senko. In that case, they should have some kind of SEND support plan, or was called an IEP in the old days. They might still call it that in some schools, but I would be wanting to know as a parent that the targets and the way that support plan is put together reflects the needs of my child. So if, for example, your child has significant barriers or issues around emotional development or behavioural difficulties, or concentration, engagement in learning, that sort of thing, then I would expect that to be somewhere with part of the support and possibly one of the targets. So something that helps them to overcome in some small way that area. Whereas if you find a plan that talks about their difficulty with emotional behaviour or behavioural difficulties, etc., but the targets relate to English and maths, that's probably not that to me is something that needs challenging, because it's not reflecting their prior area of need and it's not going to help them move on from it. So I think alongside that, if they have, I would also check that you've got the involvement of as many people as you can, like the ed psych if necessary, or occupational therapist. Is there a paediatrician that needs to be involved? Does the school have an ELSA, the emotional literacy support assistant? Most schools have one of those. It should be available if need be for your child, if they're the sort of child that might want to benefit from that opportunity to have a chat with somebody who knows about these things.
Yeah, that idea of having targets related to a child's additional needs is really important, I think, and it's really important that it's communicated to, and it should be as a matter of course shared between all school staff who teach a child, and that should be known about them. Um, but it's just worth reiterating that actually these are prior needs, and they need to be met, and they need to be considered before we we kind of worry about some academic targets. And so yeah, just reiterating that and saying, what are you doing to support my child with this? And might this be a reason why you're then seeing some more challenging behaviours, because actually this bit isn't being met, this bit is not being sorted, this bit is not being considered. Instead, you're just trying to make sure that they are solving quadratic equations or something along those lines, just reminding staff that actually they need to be thinking at a lower level sometimes, that base overriding need rather than a more specific academic one. And then also reminding them, I know we spoke about praise and the difficulties of praise before, but reminding them that actually when they are succeeding with some of those targets about emotional development or behavioral development, if they are succeeding, it's valid to praise them for it, or it's valid to kind of like acknowledge that they've done well, because for them that was a big thing, for them that was a big step. So yeah, consider what are the targets they have and whether those are being met.
Well, thanks, Lisa and Jason. We've got a lot to think about there. And we really hope that you at home enjoyed this episode and found something useful to take away from it. Be sure to look out for other episodes, such as transitions, homework, and parents' evening. Don't forget you can contact us at any time with your questions, contributions, or suggestions. Or if you fancy being a guest speaker, you're absolutely free to join us. You can contact us at education@adoption-focus.org.uk. Thanks for listening.